In the days following the daring rescue on Drixus, Lieutenant Adam Cox and his team worked tirelessly to gather critical intelligence from the freed Novan women. Through tearful interviews and hushed conversations, a grim picture emerged of the vast hydrogen slave trade that spanned dozens of worlds. The women spoke of deplorable conditions, constant abuse, and the soul-crushing despair that permeated the Novan captives. As Asha shared the brutal details of her people's plight, a quiet rage simmered in Cox's eyes. He studied the star maps and colony layouts the women provided, an audacious plan taking shape in his mind. When he presented it to his superiors, some balked at the scope and risk, but Cox argued passionately for the chance to strike a devastating blow against the hydrogen slavers. "This is our opportunity," Cox declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "We can free thousands of Novans in one coordinated assault. We'll hit them hard and fast, on multiple fronts, before they have a chance to react. And in doing so, we'll show the galaxy the true face of the Hirigen, not as fearsome warriors, but as cruel oppressors of the innocent." Asha stood at Cox's side, her presence a silent testament to the strength and resilience of her people. In the end, the plan was approved. Cox threw himself into the preparations, hand-picking teams of the coalition's most skilled commandos and infiltrators. Asha insisted on joining the mission, her eyes blazing with a fierce persistence. "I will fight for my sisters," she vowed. "I will make the Hirigen pay for every atrocity they have inflicted upon us." As the strike teams drilled and strategized, Cox found himself drawn to Asha's quiet strength and unwavering drive. In stolen moments between planning sessions, she shared with him the rich culture and history of the Novan people, a tapestry of art, music, and philosophy that the Hirigen had tried to erase. "We were a gentle people," Asha said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "We never wanted to fight, but the Hirigen gave us no choice. They came in their ships and tore our lives apart. Now we must learn to be strong, to reclaim our destiny." Cox placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, a silent promise passing between them. "We'll make this right," he assured her. "The Novans will be free. You'll have the chance to rebuild, to create the future you choose." As the day of the operation approached, word of the impending raids leaked to the media, sparking a firestorm of outrage across the civilized galaxy. The revelations of the Hirigen's cruel slave empire turned public opinion against them and solidified support for the coalition's cause. On distant Valdis Prime, the brutal Hirigen overseer Warlord Zograk watched the news feeds with a sneer of contempt. He cared nothing for galactic politics or opinion. In his mind, the Novans were chattel, tools to be used and discarded in service of the Hirigen war effort. Zograk tightened his grip on the wretched captives toiling in the moon's fetid jungle mines, determined to squeeze every last ounce of production from them. He posted additional guards and laid traps, turning the camp into a fortified bunker. "Let the humans come," he thought with cruel anticipation. He would make them pay in Novan blood for their interference. As the strike teams boarded their stealth ships and set course for Hirigen space, Cox looked out at the sea of determined faces, human and Novan alike. They all knew the risks, the stakes, but they were united by a common purpose. The Hirigen had sown the seeds of tyranny and suffering for too long. Now the time had come to reap the whirlwind. The ships slipped into warp, racing toward their targets. In the silence of space, a new chapter in the war was about to begin, one that would be written in the fires of righteous justice and the courage of unbreakable spirits. As the strike force hurtled through the void of space towards Valdis Prime, Lieutenant Adam Cox studied the deployment plans one last time. The Jungle Moon's slave labor camp, a wretched den of misery and suffering, lay heavily defended and entrenched. A frontal assault would be suicide. Next to him, Asha pored over the schematics of the orbiting Hirigen slave ships, her brow furrowed in concentration. The vessels were their key to victory and vengeance. "We'll need to hit them hard and fast," Asha said, tracing her finger over the ship's critical systems. "Capture the bridges, seize control of the engines and life support. Once we have the ships, we can evacuate the captives and scuttle the Hirigen fleet." Cox nodded grimly. "Zek warned us that Warlord Zograk has a small armada in orbit. Your rebels will face heavy resistance. We'll need to coordinate our timing perfectly." Asha's eyes flashed with purpose. We'll be ready. This is what we've trained for, the chance we've prayed for. Our people will fly or die fighting to free our brothers and sisters. As the stealth ships drifted into orbit, hidden from hydrogen sensors, Cox's infiltration team silently descended to the moon's surface. They crept through the dense jungle, disabling perimeter alarms and sentry guns with practiced efficiency. At the edge of the slave camp's clearing, they paused, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Cox gripped his rifle tightly, exchanging a last nod with his commandos. Then, as one, they burst from the foliage, hurling stun grenades and smoke bombs. The Hirogen guards, caught off guard, fell before they could raise the alarm. Cox charged through the chaos, his team fanning out behind him. They stormed the guard barracks and control center, neutralizing the defenders with brutal efficiency. The captives, realizing their liberators had come, surged against the electrified fences, desperate for freedom. "Move! Get those generators down and blow the fences!" Cox barked. His commandos raced to comply, even as more Hirogen guards boiled out of the barracks, plasma rifles blazing. In orbit, Asha's rebel assault teams docked with the slave ships, a silent and deadly boarding action. They swept through the corridors like vengeful ghosts, ruthlessly cutting down Hirogen crew. On the bridges, fierce firefights erupted as the rebels battled to seize control. Zek fought at the forefront, his massive frame shrugging off plasma bolts as his war axe cleaved Hirogen flesh. "Forward!" he bellowed. "For the Novan people! For freedom!" On the surface, Cox sprinted through the breached perimeter, rallying the surging tide of Novan captives. The jungle came alive with weapons fire as the Hirogen guards counterattacked in force, desperate to quell the uprising. Warlord Zograk strode forth, his eyes mad with rage, a crackling plasma cannon in his grip. He howled in fury, unleashing searing blasts into the ranks of fleeing slaves, uncaring of who he killed. "Debased human filth!" Zograk roared, fixing his hateful gaze on Cox. "I'll flay your hide and make the traitors watch." Cox charged to meet him, dodging and rolling to evade the plasma blasts. They crashed together in a titanic collision, Cox's rifle clattering away as they grappled in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Zograk's superior Hirogen strength drove Cox to his knees, clawed hands scrabbling at his throat. But with a desperate surge, Cox snaked his legs around and rolled, sending them tumbling across the blood-soaked ground. He fumbled at his belt and drew a combat knife, ramming it up under the Hirogen's chin with all his remaining strength. Zograk convulsed and went limp. His reign of cruelty ended in a spray of viscera. In orbit, warning klaxons blared as Asha's rebels seized the final slave ship. On the bridge, a bloodied and triumphant Zek manned the helm controls. "All ships secured," he reported. "Beginning evacuation run." Cox watched in awe as a small fleet of captured Hirogen transports descended on the camp, the Novan rebels manning their hulls. They touched down amidst the milling crowds of captives, hatch doors slamming open. "Go, go, get to the ships," Cox shouted, waving the surging tide of Novans forward. They ran in a desperate stampede, clambering aboard their salvation with cries of delirious joy. In a matter of minutes, thousands of Novans thronged the ships, packing every hold and corridor. As the last stragglers sprinted up the ramps, the vessels lifted off, their engines roaring to the heavens. Cox sagged in exhaustion and relief as he watched them rise, the freed slaves singing hymns of liberation. Over 10,000 Novans had been snatched from the jaws of hell. The first major blow struck against the Hirogen's vile industry. In orbit, Zek manned the weapons console of the lead ship, gazing in silent anger at the assembled Hirogen fleet. The alien vessels hung in space, suddenly impotent, unable to fire on their own ships full of captives. "These butchers will never enslave another soul," Zek growled. With a last salute to Asha, he overrode the fleet's warp core controls and leapt into an escape pod. The ships erupted in blinding balls of plasma, their reactors detonating in a cataclysmic explosion that lit up the void. The Hirogen fleet vanished in a maelstrom of fire and debris, the gathered forces decimated in an instant of righteous vengeance. As Cox's strike force returned wearily to their stealth ships, the Novan vessels set course for human space, their nightmare finally over. In the holds, tearful reunions unfolded as Asha and her rebels found family, long feared dead, their joy tempered by the long road still ahead. Cox watched from the bridge as Asha embraced a weeping young woman, the sisters clinging to each other as if they would never let go. In that moment, he knew that this victory, bought with blood and sacrifice, was only the beginning. The Hirogen would not let this stand. Their ruthless leaders would bay for vengeance, their cruelty redoubled by hatred. The galaxy would tremble at the storm to come. But as he looked out at the determined faces of his commandos and the fierce, unbroken spirit of the Novans, Cox felt a surging sense of purpose and drive. They had struck the first blow, they had lit the spark, and they would not rest until every last Novan walked free under the light of their reclaimed sun. The road ahead would be long and terrifying, a crucible that would test them all to the breaking point. But in that glorious moment of tears and triumph, the unbreakable bond of free souls, Lieutenant Adam Cox thought that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance after all. The shockwaves from the Valdez Prime raid reverberated across the galaxy. As news spread of the daring rescue and the destruction of the Hirogen fleet, a groundswell of support rose for the Human-Novan alliance. Lieutenant Adam Cox and his team wasted no time capitalizing on their momentum. Intelligence gleaned from the liberated Novans revealed a network of slave facilities scattered throughout Hirogen space. One target stood out as particularly heinous, a secret breeding facility on the forge world of Craxus 6. Cox's teeth clenched as he reviewed the mission briefing. "They're treating sentient beings like livestock," he growled, disgust evident in his voice. Asha's eyes blazed with cold fury. "We will end this abomination," she declared. The strike force approached Craxus 6 under the cover of a debris field, their stealth ships ghosting past Hirogen patrols. As they touched down on the planet's rugged surface, the full horror of the facility became apparent. Vast industrial complexes sprawled across the landscape, belching toxic fumes into the atmosphere. And nestled within this hellscape lay their target, a series of low, windowless buildings surrounded by electrified fences and guard towers. Cox's team moved swiftly, neutralizing the perimeter defenses before they could raise the alarm. They breached the outer walls and surged into the facility proper, where the true nightmare awaited them. Row upon row of cramped cells filled cavernous halls, each containing Novan women in various stages of pregnancy or nursing infants. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and despair. As alarms blared and Hirogen guards scrambled to mount a defense, Asha led a contingent of Novan rebels deeper into the complex. They fought with a ferocity born of righteous anger, cutting down any Hirogen that stood in their way. Cox and his human commandos provided covering fire, methodically clearing each section of the facility. The sounds of battle mixed with the cries of terrified Novan captives and wailing infants. In the central control room, Asha confronted the facility's overseer, a hulking Hirogen with cruel cybernetic implants. He sneered at her, activating a crackling energy whip. "You should be honored, little breeder," he taunted. "Your offspring will fetch high prices in the luxury markets." Asha's response was a blur of movement. She ducked under the whip's arc and drove her vibroblade up through the Hirogen's jaw. As he collapsed, gurgling his last breath, Asha spat on his corpse. "For my sisters," she hissed. With the facility secured, the grim work of evacuation began. Traumatized Novan women and children were gently coaxed from their cells, many too weak or terrified to move on their own. The human soldiers carried those who couldn't walk, whispering words of comfort. As the rescue ships lifted off, leaving Craxus 6 as a smoking ruin behind them, Cox watched Asha tend to a group of shell-shocked survivors. The weight of what they'd witnessed hung heavy in the air. "Where will they go now?" he asked softly. Asha met his gaze, her expression a mix of sorrow and perseverance. "To freedom," she replied. "And then, when they're ready, to justice." The fleet set course for the newly established refugee sanctuary on a human colony world. As the ships entered warp, Cox knew that this was only the beginning. The Hirogen Empire would soon feel the full fury of those they had so cruelly oppressed. The human colony world of Thetis Prime bustled with activity as transport ships touched down, disgorging waves of liberated Novans. Lieutenant Adam Cox surveyed the organized chaos from a makeshift command center, his eyes scanning data feeds and status reports. Another successful extraction, Asha reported, striding up to join him. Her armor was scorched and dented, testament to the fierce battles they'd waged. But we need to process these refugees faster. The hydrogen won't give us much breathing room. Cox nodded grimly. Agreed. We're expanding the facilities as quickly as we can, but the sheer numbers... He trailed off as a group of Novan women marched past, their faces set with unshakable focus. One locked eyes with Cox, her gaze burning with barely contained fury. They want to fight, Asha said softly, to strike back at those who enslaved them. Cox considered this, weighing the risks and potential rewards. After a moment, he made his decision. Assemble your best. We'll start training immediately. In the weeks that followed, Thetis Prime transformed. Refugee camps expanded into permanent settlements. Medical facilities worked around the clock, tending to the physical and psychological wounds of the liberated. And on the outskirts, a new force took shape. Asha stood before her assembled troops, pride evident in her bearing. You are no longer slaves, she declared. You are warriors, avengers, and you will help us bring the Hirogen Empire to its knees. Human instructors put the Novan women through grueling combat drills. Many faltered, but none quit. Their willpower was forged in the crucible of suffering, hardened by an unquenchable thirst for justice. As Asha's Avengers took shape, Cox turned his attention to galactic politics. He addressed a panel of alien diplomats, his voice steady as he presented evidence of Hirogen atrocities. The time for half measures is over, he stated. We call on all civilized worlds to sever ties with the Hirogen Empire. Every moment of hesitation means more lives destroyed. One by one, alien governments pledged their support. Trade embargoes tightened. Hirogen ships found themselves denied port access across vast swaths of space. The noose began to tighten. Amidst this whirlwind of activity, intelligence reports filtered in. Defectors spoke of a place of unparalleled horror and decadence, the velvet prisons of Zithor III. Cox's fist clenched as he reviewed the intel. This is our next target, he declared to his assembled command staff. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we don't stop until every last Novan is free. Under the cover of darkness, stealth transports slipped through Zithor III's defensive grid. Cox led his commandos in a surgical strike against the outer defenses, while Asha's Avengers penetrated deep into the opulent palaces. The night air filled with the crack of weapons fire and the screams of the dying. Cox fought his way through gilded corridors, past shattered statues and priceless artworks. He found Asha locked in combat with the Supreme Warlord, a towering Hirogen festooned with cybernetic enhancements. Together, human and Novan struck as one. The Warlord fell, his scaled hide perforated by precise shots and vibroblade strikes. As dawn broke, the last pockets of resistance crumbled. Dazed Novan captives emerged from their luxurious prisons, blinking in the harsh light of freedom. Among them was a young woman whose grace and poise stood out even amidst the chaos. I am Brina, she said, her voice trembling but resolute, of House Arcaria, and I thank you for our deliverance. Cox watched as Brina was escorted to a waiting transport. Something in her bearing, in the fire that still burned in her eyes despite years of torment, spoke of hope, of a future where the Novan people might reclaim their dignity and their heritage. As the fleet departed Zithor III, leaving the Hirogen fortress world a smoking ruin, Cox allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had struck another blow against the slavers, but the war was not nearly finished, and the next battle always loomed on the horizon. The liberation of Zithor III sent shockwaves across the galaxy. As news of the Hirogen's defeat spread, long-dormant embers of rebellion ignited into roaring flames. On the oceanic world of Aquaria, the amphibious Meraki people rose up against their oppressors with sudden, savage fury. Cox's encrypted comm crackled to life as reports flooded in. Lieutenant, we're receiving distress calls from Hirogen outposts on Aquaria. The entire planet's in open revolt. He turned to Asha, her eyes already gleaming with fierce anticipation. Looks like we've got some new allies. Prep the strike teams. Within hours, human dropships pierced Aquaria's atmosphere, skimming over vast azure seas. They touched down on floating cities where Meraki rebels battled Hyrogen enforcers. Cox's commandos waded into the fray, their weapons cutting through Hyrogen armor with surgical precision. Asha led a contingent of newly trained Novan warriors, their movements fluid and deadly. They fought with a cold rage born of years of subjugation, repaying the debt to their human liberators in blood and valor. In the heart of the Meraki capital, Cox found himself face to face with Sovereign Grelnesh. The amphibious leader's translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns of triumph and gratitude. "You have given us hope," Grelnesh's voice reverberated. "Now we shall give you our strength." As the last Hyrogen strongholds fell, Grelnesh summoned his people's hidden armada. Sleek vessels rose from the ocean depths, their hulls adorned with swirling patterns that matched the Meraki's skin. "Our ships and our warriors are yours to command," Grelnesh declared. "The Hyrogen's crimes will not go unanswered." Word of Aquaria's defiance spread like wildfire. On a dozen worlds, the oppressed cast off their chains. Cox's tactical display lit up with reports of uprisings across Hyrogen space. The Slaver Empire's iron grip began to crack. Asha's eyes blazed as she studied the incoming data. "This is our moment," she said, her voice low and intense. "We strike for the heart." Intelligence reports confirmed her instincts. Hyrogia, the Hyrogen homeworld, was vulnerable. Its slave labor camps held over 1 million captive Novans, powering the war machine that had brought misery to countless worlds. Cox assembled his most elite squads, Asha at his side. They slipped past Hyrogia's orbital defenses in stealth shuttles, linking up with the planet's Novan underground. Years of suffering had forged these resistance fighters into hardened warriors, their knowledge of Hyrogia's defenses invaluable. As Cox's teams infiltrated key military installations, Asha led the assault on the labor camps. Sirens wailed as captives overpowered their guards, seizing weapons and freedom in one furious surge. In the teeming slums of Zarash, the Hyrogian capital, Brina moved like a shadow. Her whispered words ignited long-dormant memories in the hearts of her people. Ancient Novan prayers and battle songs echoed through cramped alleyways, a spiritual awakening that fueled the physical rebellion. The skies above Hyrogia erupted in fierce combat as the combined Meraki and human fleets engaged the planet's defensive platforms. Novan refugees streamed onto waiting transports, guided by Cox's support teams. Deep within the High Citadel, Cox and Asha fought side by side against Warlord Mordax's elite guard. The Hyrogen leader's cybernetic enhancements sparked and sputtered as precise shots found weak points in his armor. Mordax fell, his reign of terror ended by a Novan vibroblade and a human plasma round fired in perfect unison. As Cox secured the Citadel's command center, Asha's voice rang out over the comms. "Hyrogia has fallen. The Novan people are free." Cheers erupted across the planet and beyond. The Hyrogen war machine, deprived of its slave labor and leadership, began to crumble. Long subjugated races flocked to humanity's banner, united in their thirst for justice. On the verdant world of New Eden, now a sanctuary for liberated Novans, Brina stood before a gathered throng. Her voice carried across the assembled multitude as she draped an intricately woven mantle over Asha's shoulders. "Our people have known only darkness for generations," Brina intoned. "Today, we step into the light. Asha, we name you mother and guardian of our restored nation." Asha's eyes glistened as she faced her people. "We have reclaimed our freedom," she declared. "Now we must use it to ensure no race ever suffers as we have. Humanity extended its hand to us in our darkest hour. We shall stand with them, now and always, as defenders of liberty throughout the stars." Cox watched from the sidelines, a mix of pride and purpose swelling in his chest. The war was just getting started, but a new chapter had begun. As the celebration around him swelled, his mind was already racing with plans for the battles yet to come. The celebrations on New Eden were cut short as Cox's comm unit chirped urgently. He exchanged a glance with Asha, both sensing the weight of what was to come. "Intel just came through," Cox said, his voice low. We've got a shot at Chlorthak. Asha's eyes widened. The Hirigen home system? Cox nodded grimly. Their last real stronghold. If we take it, we break their back for good. Within hours, the Coalition war room buzzed with activity. Holograms flickered, showing the Chlorthak system in exquisite detail. At its heart, an unremarkable moon harbored a secret that could end the war. Overmaster Merkin, Asha spat the name like venom. He's dug in deep, commanding what's left of their forces from an underground citadel. Cox studied the tactical overlay. Conventional assault would be suicide. We need to go in quiet, hit them before they know what's happening. They assembled their strike force with painstaking care. Human Spec Ops veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with Asha's battle-hardened Novan commandos. Meraki infiltrators, their amphibious forms rippling with barely contained energy, rounded out the team. The Coalition fleet slipped into the Chlorthak system under the cover of experimental cloaking technology. As they approached the fortified moon, tension crackled through the air like static electricity. Cox gripped the handle above the dropship's hatch, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Beside him, Asha's eyes gleamed with cold fury. For every child torn from their mother's arms, she whispered, for every innocent sold into bondage, we end this. Today. The dropship's belly opened, disgorging the strike team into the inky darkness of a hidden entrance. They moved like ghosts through ancient corridors, their footsteps muffled by high-tech sound dampeners. The first Hirigen patrol never saw them coming. Silenced weapons coughed, and cybernetically enhanced bodies crumpled to the ground, but they couldn't stay undetected forever. Alarms blared as they breached the inner sanctum. Cox's world narrowed to a series of brutal, close-quarters firefights. Hirigen shock troops poured from side passages, their massive frames filling the narrow corridors. A vicious melee erupted. Human and Novan fought side by side, their movements a deadly dance honed by shared battles. Meraki warriors unleashed centuries of pent-up rage, their normally placid features twisted into snarls of hate. Cox ducked under a Hirigen's wild swing, his vibroblade finding a weak point in the alien's armor. As his opponent fell, he caught sight of an ornate doorway at the far end of the chamber. Asha, he shouted over the din of battle. That's got to be Merkin's command center. They fought their way forward, step by bloody step. Cox's armor was scored and dented, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the fire in Asha's eyes burned brighter than ever as they reached the threshold. The doors exploded inward under a breaching charge. Through the smoke and debris, Cox saw a towering figure in elaborate battle armor. Overmaster Merkin roared in defiance, activating a crackling energy shield. You dare? The Hirigen leader's voice boomed. You insignificant vermin dare to challenge the natural order? Asha's reply was a hail of plasma fire that splashed harmlessly off the shield. Merkin laughed, a sound like grinding metal, as he raised a massive weapon. Scatter! Cox yelled, diving for cover as searing energy lanced through the air where he'd been standing. The command center devolved into chaos. Cox and Asha darted from cover to cover, their shots barely slowing the Hirigen warlord. Merkin's return fire gouged chunks from the walls, filling the air with acrid smoke. A lucky shot from one of Asha's commandos overloaded the shield generator. Merkin howled in rage, discarding his heavy weapon and drawing a wickedly curved blade crackling with energy. I will not be denied my destiny, he roared, charging forward with inhuman speed. Cox fired desperately, but Merkin batted the shots aside. The Hirigen's blade swept down in a killing arc, only to be met by Asha's vibroblade. The Novan warrior stood her ground, muscles straining as she held back the much larger alien. Your destiny, Asha growled through gritted teeth, ends here. Cox seized the opening, tackling Merkin's legs. The three combatants went down in a tangle of limbs and flashing blades. Cox felt white-hot pain as the energy blade grazed his side, but he held on grimly. Asha's vibroblade found its mark, plunging deep into a weak point at Merkin's neck. The Hirigen convulsed, his death throes nearly crushing Cox before the massive alien finally went still. Panting heavily, Cox pulled himself to his feet. He helped Asha up, both of them leaning on each other for support as they surveyed the carnage around them. "It's done," Asha said softly. Cox nodded, keying his comm unit. "Stronghold secure. Merkin is down. Repeat, Merkin is neutralized." Cheers erupted over the channel, quickly replaced by the organized chaos of a mop-up operation. As coalition forces poured into the Citadel, Cox's mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that lay before them. The Hirogen Empire had fallen, but the real work was just beginning. Aboard the flagship Titan, Cox watched as Merkan's captured lieutenants were led before a hastily assembled tribunal. The galaxy would be watching what came next. The Titan's observation deck buzzed with activity as Cox watched the procession of captured Hirogen officials. His comm unit chirped, and Administrator Graves's voice came through. "Cox, we need you planetside. The first ships from Terra have arrived." Within hours, Cox found himself in the Grand Assembly Hall of New Alexandria, the hastily constructed capital of the liberated territories. Delegates from a dozen species filled the chamber, their voices a cacophony of dialects and translators. Asha stood at the center, her presence commanding attention. As she began to speak, the room fell silent. "We stand at a crossroads," she said, her voice carrying to every corner. "The Hirogen are defeated, but their legacy of exploitation threatens to live on. We must forge a new path, an interstellar republic that protects the rights of all sapient beings." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Asha's gaze swept the room, settling on a distinguished human near the front. "I nominate former President Tyler Robinson to serve as our first chancellor. His unwavering moral compass guided humanity through the darkest days of this war. Let it now guide us all towards a brighter future." The assembly erupted in cheers. Robinson stepped forward, his weathered face etched with both hope and the weight of responsibility. "I accept this honor," he said, "and I make this vow. No being in our republic will ever again suffer the indignity of enslavement. Our first act must be to grant full rights and protections to all those the Hirogen sought to oppress." As Robinson spoke, Cox noticed Talia Graves furiously taking notes. When the new chancellor finished, she approached him, speaking in hushed tones. Robinson nodded, then addressed the assembly once more. "To oversee our efforts in rebuilding and safeguarding our hard-won liberties, I appoint Talia Graves as Minister of Alien Integration and Cultural Affairs." In the days that followed, the galaxy transformed. On worlds like Novalis, Novan communities established cultural enclaves, their rich traditions flourishing in freedom. In human cities, Novan students like Brina enrolled in universities, sharing knowledge that had been suppressed for generations. Cox found himself in a newly integrated district of New Alexandria, marveling at the sight of humans and Novans working side by side to construct homes and businesses. The air was filled with the mingled sounds of human and Novan languages, punctuated by laughter. A commotion near a half-finished community center caught his attention. A group of human workers stood transfixed as a Novan woman demonstrated an intricate dance, her movements fluid and mesmerizing. Cox recognized her. It was Brina, the dancer he'd first encountered in the Resistance. As he watched, a young human man stepped forward, attempting to mimic Brina's movements. His clumsy efforts drew good-natured laughter, but Brina's patient guidance soon had him executing a passable imitation. The two continued to dance, their joy palpable. Cox's comm unit buzzed, pulling him from the scene. Asha's face appeared on the small screen, her expression grim. "We've got trouble on Helios Prime," she said without preamble. "Hirogen loyalists are running a black market operation, trafficking Novan women. My team is prepping for deployment." "I'll meet you at the spaceport," Cox replied, already moving. Hours later, their stealth shuttle touched down on the outskirts of Helios Prime's largest settlement. The frontier world was a patchwork of bustling human colonies and areas still marked by Hirogen occupation. Asha led the way, her elite Novan commandos moving like shadows through the night. They approached a nondescript warehouse on the edge of town, its windows dark. "Intel says this is their base of operations," Asha whispered. "We go in fast and hard, no quarter for slavers." The assault was swift and merciless. Cox provided covering fire as Asha's team breached the main entrance. Inside, they found cages filled with terrified Noven women. The traffickers, a mix of humans and alien species, put up little resistance against the fury of Asha's warriors. As the last of the slavers fell, Asha stood over their leader, her vibroblade humming with lethal energy. "Remember this moment," she snarled. "Remember the face of the one who brought your foul enterprise to an end. I am Asha, and as long as I draw breath, no Novan will ever wear chains again." News of the raid spread quickly. Across the frontier worlds, would-be slavers trembled at whispered accounts of the scourge of slavers and her unstoppable commandos. But even as the young republic celebrated these victories, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Reports trickled in of Hirogen warlords massing their forces beyond the new borders. And then came the news that sent shockwaves through the halls of power. Overmaster Murkhan, the deposed tyrant of the Hirogen Empire, had escaped his lunar prison. His whereabouts were unknown, leaving the entire republic to wonder, where would the architect of so much suffering strike next? Cox's comm unit crackled to life. Administrator Graves's voice tense. "We've got incoming. Multiple bogies just dropped out of hyperspace near Outpost Sigma." "Pirates?" Cox asked, already moving towards the command center. "Worse, it's Murkhan." The name sent ice through Cox's veins. He burst into the war room, where holographic displays showed a swarm of red dots descending on the outlying human colony. "How?" he demanded. "We had him locked down tight." Asha's face appeared on a nearby screen, her expression grim. "Loyalists within the prison staff. They smuggled him out during a shift change." The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Cox coordinated defense efforts, but Murkhan's forces struck with devastating precision. Reports flooded in of scorched settlements and thousands taken captive. "They're not just raiding," Asha growled. "This is a full-scale invasion." Intelligence confirmed the worst. Murkhan had rallied rogue Hirogen warlords under the banner of a true Hirogen ascendancy. Their goal, to reclaim their empire and reinstate the slave trade. Cox found himself back in the thick of combat, leading Republic forces in desperate holding actions. On New Terrace, he narrowly escaped an ambush by Hirogen huntresses, their stealth technology nearly costing him his life. During a brief lull, he received an urgent message from Brina. The former dancer, now a cultural ambassador, had disturbing news. "Adam, it's worse than we thought," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not just taking humans. I've confirmed Novan captives, including Shalara." Cox's blood ran cold. Shalara had been overseeing Novan relocation efforts. If she'd been captured... He relayed the information to Asha, who was coordinating with Meraki allies on New Aquaria. Her response was swift and decisive. "I've intercepted a transmission," she said. "Shalara managed to get a message out. There's a massive processing station on Avalos. That's where they're taking the captives." Within hours, Cox found himself aboard a stealth insertion craft, surrounded by a mix of human commandos and Novan warriors. Asha led the briefing, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "We go in fast and we hit hard," she said. "Intel suggests minimal defenses. They're not expecting us to find this place so quickly." The reality on Avalos was far worse than they'd imagined. As they breached the facility's outer perimeter, the stench of fear and despair was overwhelming. Cox's stomach churned at the sight of Novans and humans crowded into filthy holding pens. They fought their way through corridors crawling with Hirogen guards. Cox's rifle barked, each shot finding its mark with brutal efficiency. Beside him, Asha moved like a force of nature, her vibroblade leaving a trail of broken bodies in her wake. In the heart of the facility, Cox came face to face with Gjara, Murkhan's huntress lieutenant. She lunged at him, energy blade humming with deadly intent. Cox ducked under her swing, feeling the heat of the blade as it passed inches from his face. Their battle was a desperate whirl of strikes and counterstrikes. Cox's armor took hit after hit, his own blows barely slowing the cybernetically enhanced Hirogen. A lucky shot from his sidearm finally pierced her defenses, and Cox finished the fight with a brutal thrust of his combat knife. As Gjara fell, alarms blared throughout the facility. Cox keyed his comm. "Asha, we're blown! How are we on the extraction?" "Almost there," she replied, breathless. We've got Shalar and hundreds more. But Adam, you need to see this. In a secure lab deep within the complex, Cox found Asha standing over a bank of computers. Her face was ashen as she turned to him. They've created a bioweapon, she said, a control virus designed to lobotomize Novans, and they've already used it. Cox's mind raced. Where? New Alos, the refugee sanctuary. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Thousands of Novans, their minds erased, turned into perfect slaves. The Republic had won its freedom, but Murkon was determined to drag them back into darkness. As they raced to their extraction point, Cox knew the real battle was just beginning. They had struck a blow against Murkon's operation, but the war for the soul of the galaxy was not nearly finished. The years following Murkon's defeat saw a galaxy in flux. On Novalis, the ancestral Novan homeworld, Cox walked through the bustling streets of New Harmony, marveling at the blend of architectural styles. Towering spires of gleaming alloy stood alongside intricately carved stone structures, a physical manifestation of two cultures intertwining. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Cox noticed the sidelong glances, the hushed conversations that ceased as he passed. A group of young Novans huddled around a public holo projector, their faces intent as a passionate voice rang out. And I say to you, my brothers and sisters, that we must reclaim our heritage. The humans may have broken our chains, but at what cost? Cox recognized the speaker, Ashana, a former slave whose fiery rhetoric had been gaining traction. Her image flickered above the crowd, eyes blazing with conviction. Every day we lose more of ourselves to human ways. Our customs, our beliefs, even our very essence, all eroded in the name of progress. I ask you, is this truly freedom? The gathering crowd murmured in agreement. Cox felt a chill run down his spine. He keyed his comm unit. Graves, we've got a situation brewing. The purity movement is gaining ground faster than we anticipated. Talia Graves's voice crackled through, tight with worry. I know, Adam. It's not just Novalis. We're seeing similar rhetoric on a dozen worlds. The Council of Elders is worried enough that they're planning a state visit to Terra. We need to show a united front. Is that wise? Bringing them all to one place could be dangerous? It's a calculated risk, but we need this, Adam. The Republic is fracturing at the seams. Weeks later, Cox found himself in a secured briefing room on Terra. The air was thick with tension as President Robinson addressed the assembled team. Intelligence suggests that extremist elements within the purity movement are planning to assassinate the Council during their visit. We cannot allow this to happen. Asha, your team will be responsible for tracking down these radicals and neutralizing the threat. Asha nodded, her face a mask of dedication. But Cox noticed a flicker of something else in her eyes. Doubt. As the meeting concluded, Cox pulled Asha aside. Are you all right? You seemed distracted in there. Asha's gaze hardened. I'm fine. I know my duty. That's not what I asked. She sighed, shoulders sagging slightly. It's complicated, Adam. I believe in what we're doing, but some of the things Ishana says, they resonate. The humans mean well, but do they truly understand our ways, our needs? Before Cox could respond, alarms blared throughout the complex. A frantic voice came over the comms. Multiple explosions reported at the Karanis military base. Casualties unknown. Cox and Asha exchanged a grim look. Whatever doubts plagued them, action was needed now. As they raced towards the hangar bay, Cox couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle for the soul of the Republic was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.